Okay. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure to be here today in this important webinar organized by the Energy and Decarbonization Committee of the Brazilian Chamber of Commerce on the perspectives for the Brazilian energy sector under the government of President-elect Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. Since his election on 31st of October this year, and at a moment where the world, and especially Europe, go through a very serious energy crisis, the market has been waiting and wondering which direction the Brazilian energy sector will take from 1st of January 23 onwards. Possible change in oil and gas, in the electric sector, the role of Petrobras, and in which areas the giant company will be investing in, and the scenery that lies ahead in relation to natural gas are amongst the areas of ultimate interest. Very, very important too, of course, it is the direction that Brazilian renewable energy policy will take, not only because of the need to diversify Brazil's energy supply in Brazil, but also in view of Brazil's role as an essential player in the world scenery in areas associated to climate change and energy transition. All of these topics, which the market and the public in general have been following with close interest. And for this reason, I want to congratulate very much the chair of the Energy and Decarbonization Committee, Daniella Carneiro, and Ieda Gomes, for assembling a team of such eminent caliber to speak to us today. I also want to thank each and every one of our distinguished speakers and moderator for taking the time to be with us this afternoon. Before they are introduced to you by Daniella, I would like to say a few words on our housekeeping rules, and they are the following. Please keep your microphone muted and camera switched off during the webinar. There will be a Q&A session today, and questions can be asked via the Teams chat box. So please feel free to type your question to our speakers during the webinar. Also, please note that the webinar is being recorded, and the recording of this session will be posted at the Chamber's website and social media platforms in the next few days. So with these words, I thank you all again, and now over to you, Daniella.
Daniella, your mic.
Can you hear me now? Okay, wonderful. So sorry about that. But as I was saying, thank you, Vera. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Thank you in particular to our speakers, Mauricio Tomalsquim, Luiz Adams, and Mario Braga. And thank you also to the audience for joining us for what looks to be a very interesting and exciting debate. It's really sort of an exchange of ideas about what the future might look like. Like Vera said, this is a very important moment as the market prepares for a new phase, particularly in Brazil, in a context not only of energy transition, but also of global energy security concerns. So what changes we might see in the market, how the Brazilian energy matrix might evolve, what role we can take in the global journey towards energy transition. Brazil has the potential to be a green energy powerhouse for the future. It already is, but it's got a lot of potential that can be explored. I would briefly like to reemphasize the housekeeping rules that Vera mentioned. So please, all microphones on mute and all questions in the chat box so that we can sort of pick out the themes and weave them into the Q&A, which will be moderated by Ieda Gomes. I think that really what you want to hear is not from me, but from our illustrious speakers. So please, can I pass the word for Mauricio Tomalsquim, former head of the EPE, professor at the Universidade Federal do Rio de Janeiro, and the head of the Lula's energy transition team. Please, Mauricio.
Thank you very much for the kind invitation to be here with you. Well, I would like to start make a disclosure. I in fact was the coordinator of the transition work group for energy and mines, but we have delivered the report to the government, and now the committee does not exist more. So I do not have the mandate to talk on behalf of the new government. So in fact, I'm a professor now from the university, and I will speak as such, as a kind of specialist in the area. Cannot anything that I'm saying is, let's say, on behalf of the new government. Well, I think the more interesting is to make a kind of dialogue. I'm going to say a few thoughts, but let's say then we can make a dialogue. I would like to start, I think, talk about the main challenge that for the new government. And I think that the first one is the question of the high energy price, the electricity energy price. We have in Brazil very low cost to produce electricity, one of the lowest in the world, because we have a lot of natural resources and a lot of renewable natural resources. However, we have one of the most expensive tariffs in the world. And the difference, the reason for that is that about 50% of the energy price that the consumer pay is for cover taxes and, let's say, charges. I think that somebody has this. Okay. So I was saying, let's say, half of the tariffs is to pay tax and charges, and the charge is, let's say, to allow to give subsidies to many sectors. So these and more the agents in the Brazil are asking for more subsidies, and so we are in a situation that is the tariffs becoming very expensive and difficult to pay. Another challenge is related to the expansion of the transmission system. When you have you want to spend the whole of the renewable in the power mix, one of the needs that you have is to increase the flexibility of the grid. And one way to increase this flexibility is increasing the transmission grid itself. And to do that, we need to make huge investments in the expansion of the grid. And the EPE, that's the Planning Energy Agency, has made a plan to the government put an auction, organize auctions of a huge amount of transmission lines to be offered to the market to be built and operate. And we need to attract private investors to participate of those auctions. and make those investments. So I think that this is a very attractive sector, and I think that under with very good rate of returns. The third challenge is to increase the share of renewables in the energy mix, as I think Ieda has already mentioned, or Daniella. Brazil has already a very important share of renewables. When you look to the energy mix, 48% of the Brazilian energy mix are renewable, while in the world only 12% of the mix are renewable. And when we look to the power sector, the share of renewable energy is even higher, about 86% of the production of electricity came from renewable sources, while in the world only less than 30% of the electricity produced is originated from renewable energy sources. So we are in a good position in the world, but I think that we can increase the participation of renewables, and let's say have a target to have zero net emissions in the power sector. So I think this is one of the main targets that the new government will have to deal with. But well, this is only a few thoughts. I know that you have many questions, and so I want to give the floor to return the floor to Daniella and Ieda. Thank you.
Thank you, Mauricio. As he set the scenes for the four big challenges and how we're going to respond to that. And I would like to invite Mario Braga, Senior Analyst at Control Risks. Control Risks is a company that assess market sentiment, market risks, and Mario will provide some overviews on what the current investor sentiment in terms of future of energy. Thank you. The floor is yours, Mario.
Thank you very much, Ieda, and thank you all for the invitation and for attending the webinar. It's a pleasure to be here. First, I'll talk about political risks in the sector, and it's important to have in mind that political risks are basically a double-edged sword. We can talk about risks and opportunities as well. From a political risk perspective regarding the energy sector, what we have seen and heard from investors are basically two main concerns with regards to the incoming administration. When it comes to the electricity sector, of course, the privatization of Eletrobras and all the talks that occurred around it and the contract risks, whether or not a Lula administration would reverse this transaction. We know that even from before the privatization take place, we are consulted by many foreign investors trying to understand if they eventually participated, would that be reversed or not? And the assessment we had by then, and I think that stands by now, is that contract risks will remain very low. This scenario is very unlikely. What we think that there may be some changes to the privatization package, all the other minor things that were approved within the privatization itself, which include, for example, the contracting of natural gas plants in the interior of the country in some areas that don't even have the pipelines and all, how that could also have impact in energy prices, for example. So we think that there may be changes in that regard, but not in the privatization itself. And then, of course, the other big theme is Petrobras and how the new administration is inclined or not to interfere directly with the company's pricing policy. We've heard this week whether or not Aloysio Mercadante could be appointed to the company, and that entails changes to Brazil's state-owned enterprises law, how that can impact governability standards. I think that is still a concern. It's still unclear what will actually happen, but what we can anticipate is that a Lula administration is likely to see state-owned companies as policy-making tools as they have seen in the past, not to be used the same way, but of course, if there is a price shock, there will likely be some sort of interference to limit the impacts on inflation, for example. Petrobras is also likely to be seen as a way to carry out investments. So there will be a change in the company's not only investment plan, but divestment plan as well. When you think about the refineries or how these large dividends that have been paid out in the past years will likely be focused now on investment and generating jobs and kind of trying to focus on the sector itself in the country. And then we can think of also opportunities. And I think that there's a lot to talk about in that regard as well. And as Mauricio mentioned before, renewables will be definitely a field that Brazil has a great potential, and that we have a lot of investors that are interested. We have seen over the past years several motions of understanding being signed between foreign companies. And that's important not only with the federal government, but especially with state-level governments across the Northeast, for example. And that will likely to continue amid this effort to diversify the country's energy mix. It's also going to be a key player with how Lula tries to reintroduce Brazil to the international scenario. So all this debate about climate change will be important. In that regard, we can think of some tools, for example, such as perhaps either incentives or subsidized credit for the construction of offshore wind farms or solar parks or green hydrogen projects. We can go into detail on, for example, how the development bank can think of ESG ratchets, which is a practice in the private credit market as well. And amid a limited public investment capacity, auctions will continue to happen. So this need to bring in private investment to the sector will also remain in place. So I think that all these elements baked in together show that yes, there will be some changes, some regulations that will be tweaked, but that not represent significant risks that will become obstacles that cannot be kind of won by investors and businesses. So yeah, I think that's kind of my 2 cents for now, and I'm happy to take questions later on. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mario. I would like to ask a question later, but before that, let's listen to Luis Adams, and he's a partner of the law firm Tauil Chequer. And prior to that, Luis was the former Attorney General of Brazil in 2009 to 2016. And Luis has a very interesting, not only domestic, but international and legal perspective. The floor is yours, Luis.
Thank you, Ieda. Thank you for the invitation. I was very interested in Mario presentation. I was trying to put aside what I was saying, start discussing that. But just to be, I think we have to understand, and you have the advantage here, because Lula already was a former president. He was the past president from Brazil for 8 years. So you're not dealing here with someone you don't know what we're doing or inexperienced in the matter. So I think Lula has, as a profile, as a characteristic, some important characteristics. First, conciliation is the base of his government. The very fact that is the very fact that he is in a ticket, a partnership with Alckmin, was not long before the main opposition of his government, as 2003 to 2010, shows that he has a new perspective, new kind of agenda here. So in this agenda, we're dealing with 2 different perspectives the former governor, or the current governor, who will be leaving ending December 21, was a governor who created a lot of conflicts in the perspective of a government agenda. Conflicts with the judiciary branch, conflict of Congress, and after that he created some kind of possible agenda, and conflict with many areas of policy making. And this is a very strong difference. This is a new kind of proposal. We are creating a constellation between different perspectives. Even Lula says that Alckmin is a president, he is president of Brazil, but he presents the ticket as President Lula and President Alckmin. So he shows in the fact that Alckmin was appointed as leading the transition process, showed this. So this is very important. Second, I think Lula is facing or leading front of party on ideological different perspectives. You have Marina Silva, you have Simone Tebet, you have many. So there are 16 parties in this front. So it's very different, very broad, ideological speaking. And I think his main goal is to create a common ground for this government to work. And one perspective here is to rebuild our republic practices or democratic practice. Not the republic itself, but its practice that was lost in the past based in the different conflicts that established. In the question of the legitimacy of the election process that Brazil already have for more than 3 years, and so on. So this is the main profile. And I think the challenges are, in fact, rebuilding this harmonic relationship between the government powers, government branches, judiciary, legislative, and Congress, establish and overpass this ideological difference that contaminated many of our relations in society, and reestablish a more common ground for understanding, accepting. The poverty agenda and the regional inequality is a major thing for Governor Lula. Environment protection becomes again an important agenda. Not that just that Brazil is committed to environment, but I think in Lula's perspective that Brazil should lead the agenda, the environment agenda, as did before, and reconquer or reestablish economic growth. So Brazil can be a friend. Lula in his campaign talked a lot about rule of the law and security for business and so on. And this is important, I think, agenda. So his agenda so far, the challenge so far, is as we can obtain for ministers, appointed ministers, minister of the economic, but as Haddad and Rui Costa, etc., is tax reform is a priority. Tax reform, fiscal responsibility. And that will give many aspects of what is said for Mauricio and Mario about fiscal benefits and advantage should be being reviewed in this new base report. I think that the adjustment and the fiscal responsibility with the adjustment of the budget, the public budget, is very, very, very significant, important. That was lost. We're facing the end of this government where many areas of Brazil of government without money to fund education, passports, whatever. So this should be reestablished. The administrative reform, we don't know yet what he means about that, but we're saying a lot about making administrative reform. And I think the focus on environment, racial, and gender policies. This is a very strong agenda for this government. It's being repeated, so on and everything. But one thing, just to end and can go forward, I've been just now in the inauguration, the new president of the Federal Account Court, and was very, President Lula was there, Alckmin, the current government, there a lot of presence. Congress was all present, the judiciary was present, so it was a very important moment. And what was talking there is about conciliation, about structuring a common ground for the state to work. And this, I think, would be the main agenda for the future. I would like to talk about Mario comments, basically about the reverse privatization. I don't think that will happen. And you can just see what happened in the past. You can see, for instance, airports, was Dilma who initiated the privatization of airports in Brazil. Before that, all public administrated. Ports, she expanded with the terminal for private use that was funded by her, by President Dilma, and I think Lula will not take that. But I can comment later when the question comes up. Well, thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to start with a round of questions. So when Mauricio mentioned the four challenges, one of the actually the two challenges together is to expand the participation of renewables energy in the transmission system, because one comes with the other, in particular because renewables are intermittent, so you need to oversize the transmission distribution system to accommodate for this intermittency. On the other hand, Brazil, and that start actually when Mauricio was the president of EPE with the auctions for renewable energy, that started a virtuous cycle in Brazil, where we have now a situation that wind and solar in Brazil together represents a huge amount of the participation in the energy mix when we didn't have anything a few years ago. So the combined renewables energy emission, wind and solar, 45 gigawatts, is like 4 times Itaipu. And a recent study from McKinsey shows that Brazil has the conditions, because of the insolation and the wind regime, to become a powerhouse for green hydrogen. And McKinsey study forecasts that in order to produce 12 million tons, 13 million tons of hydrogen per annum, it will be necessary to invest $200 billion and install 108 gigawatts of renewable capacity. That's a huge undertaking by 2040. At the same time, we see the United States that they promulgate the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, where Joe Biden is subsidizing hydrogen and renewable energy to the tune of $450 billion. So how can Brazil compete with the situation? Take into account, we have a very virtuous cycle over the last 20 years in terms of private investment, but we also have to compete with a powerhouse like the USA. Would you mind to comment on that, Mauricio, Luis, and Mario, if you wish?
Well, as I have said, yes, Brazil is a very good situation, has a very good situation to increase renewable energy and to be, let's say, has net zero emission in terms of carbon. So Brazil can, in fact, lead the world in what concerns renewable energy, because I will give you only one example. The capacity factor means the generation that you can the generation of electricity of a wind power plant is in Brazil twice bigger than in Europe. I mean, with the same wind generation, we can produce twice energy than in Europe. What they call capacity factor in Brazil is 41 or 45%, while in Europe is 21%. When we talk about onshore wind energy. So this means that we can produce electricity at a very low cost. When we started with our auctions in Brazil, the first auction we have buy wind electricity for the equivalent of $85 per megawatt hour. The last auction was $30 per megawatt hour. And 2 years before it was even $70 per megawatt hours. The problem is with the Ukrainian war and COVID, there was an increase. But anyway, $30, very low price. So Brazil is very competitive. So I think that we have, let's say, a good perspective to investments in this sector. You have a problem in terms of the short term. It's not a problem, it's a good problem, in fact, is that we have a surplus of electricity until 2025 because the economic crisis, the demand did not grew enough. So let's say when we arrived in 2003, I was the vice minister of energy, and my main concern was the shortage of energy, to have the expansion of the shortage of the sector to avoid power shortage. And now we have a situation where we have a surplus of energy because of the crisis. So I think that we are very comfortable situation. But as you have said, if we have the electrification of the economy with electrical cars, electricity replacing fuel oil and natural gas in the industry, the production of green hydrogen using electrolysis, we are going to need to increase the production of electricity. So in the midterm, I think that we need a very huge amount of investment in generation yet. So let's say in the short term, we have a surplus, but looking ahead, I think that there is yet a good space to invest in the sector in Brazil. Okay, I don't know if I answered your question, but.
Thank you. Let's see what the US will bring in terms of, they subsidize hydrogen at $3 per kilo. So that's a huge amount of money. So yeah. Brazil will need to compete with this powerhouse as well if you want to attract this $200 billion of investment as well.
There is a study made by Bloomberg, very interesting, showing that Brazil has the potential to produce the lowest cost hydrogen in the series of countries that they have analyzed. Because of our low cost of electricity, we are very competitive.
Yeah, and I think, I don't agree with me, Mark, but I think we faced in the past some very serious drought and problem with raining that create energy problems. And I think Brazil has been investing in these years in this diversify its energy base, aeolic, solar panel, but still a very hydraulic based energy producer. And a second point I can put out, and you're right, I think it will be addressing, I expect that this will be addressed with the tax reform, is how much tax is being collected in energy base. Because the thing is, this kind of tax collection is state, not federal, but state responsibility, and is a very important revenue for the state. Normally very expensive. It's very high tax, exactly because it's easier to collect, and because is the low litigation in this kind, and is very the volume of collection is very high. So the state is very dependable of this kind of collection. And dealing with this, I think something should be addressed in a tax reform in order to lower the cost of energy in Brazil.
And just to add on what Mauricio and Luis just mentioned, I think that in addition to the competitiveness and the tax issues, and as Ieda brought to the scene, how the US is looking to subsidize the renewables over there. We have to have in mind that, of course, Brazil does not have the physical capacity to compete with the US in terms of the magnitude of the subsidies. So rather, it would need to focus on the quality of the subsidy. So how well tax breaks are structured to actually translate into incentives for the private sector. So that is on one front. And then thinking more broadly from a political risk perspective and how investors assess and take decisions, a more stable scenario with reduced institutional risks, with reduced clashes with other branches of power. It also reduces uncertainty. So in this environment that welcomes more investment, with a government that adopts a rhetoric that it's much more aligned with the green agenda, with the fight against climate change, that also helps. So in addition to that, from a sector-specific angle, perhaps what the government can do also is to avoid a lot of regulatory volatility that would fuel, for example, legal uncertainty. This would be something that would be an obstacle. But being able to keep in mind this idea of the quality of the subsidies, of reduced political instability, and of regulatory predictability, these would all be factors that could help Brazil become more competitive as well.
Thank you. I got a question from the chat, and because I have some limitations on the chat, but I got one here that will be interesting. Then that is addressed to Mauricio. Is how do you see the role of natural gas in Brazil? There is a big debate about the role of the gas that is currently being reinjected in the pre-salt. You have like 3 times the volume of the Brazil-Bolivia pipeline being reinjected, among other uses, to increase the pressure for the oil reservoirs, of course, but also some of the gas could be made available to balance the intermittencies of renewable energy in a combined way. How do you see the role of gas, and what do you think can be done to accelerate the use of this gas that's currently being reinjected?
Yes, that's a very good question. Well, the main role of gas is, let's say, is in the industrial sector, replacing fuel oil in the industry. I think that there is a very important place there. The second place is, let's say, in the power sector, in thermal power plants to complement the intermittent renewables. But there, I should say, as flexible thermal power plants, no thermal plants to be used in the base load, as was voted in the Eletrobras law, privatization law. Why that? Because if we have thermal power plants in the base load, we are going to burn natural gas, expensive natural gas, and let's say waste hydropower, solar power, and wind power when we have good natural conditions. So what we need in the sector are flexible thermal power plants that turn on when you need it, generate when you need the system need it, but when you don't need you stop the production of electricity. This is the main challenge. Let's say in terms of the constant use of natural gas, so is the industry. In terms of intermittent use of natural gas, is the power sector. The natural gas, let's say, is a transition energy source when you look to industry, but it's not a transition energy source when you look to the power sector, because the power sector is already very renewable. In Europe, you consider the natural gas as a transition fuel because it is replacing coal, or mainly. But in Brazil, coal represents, let's say, 2 or 3% of the power generation. So if we put the thermal powers running all the time, you are going to replace solar, wind, and hydroelectricity. So in Brazil, the natural gas for electricity is not a transition energy resource, but yes, in the industry it is.
So the big challenge is to develop the industrial demand in Brazil, because it's been because of the economy in Brazil, because of the price of gas, the industrial demand for natural gas has been quite stagnant over the last 10 years. So you have this big challenge, Mauricio, how to increment industrial demand if you don't think that gas can be used or base load for power generation. So it'll be a very good debate for next year.
Yeah, no, you are completely right. The main problem is the price. You have to, you have a lot of natural gas. It is somehow, let's say, you are not using all our potential, but the problem is cost. It's not, for the economic point of view, it's not enough to have the natural gas. The natural gas has to arrive in the industry competing with other sources. So we have here a price problem that has to be solved.
Thank you. I have another question coming from the chat here that I think Luis and Mario can possibly answer that. Luis mentioned that Brazil has a tradition of not breaching contracts. That's true, because you can see from over the last 30 years, it's kind of been a mantra that Brazil respect contracts. And we see that in any government, PT, PSDB, etc. But just what do you see as the role of Petrobras in this new scenario? Because Petrobras, over the last few years, has kind of insisted that their key skills are to produce oil from pre-salt at a very competitive price, and is one of the most competitive, actually cleanest oil in the world, very light oil. And do you see Petrobras evolving into energy company? And how do you see the space occupied by Petrobras in the future, since you don't see divestment as a priority for the new government?
That's for me?
Yes, for you.
Okay.
For you and Mario.
I think Mauricio
wants to comment as well.
Mauricio is more able to. But one thing I think should understand that in the current government, Bolsonaro's government, the perspective of state-owned company was privatization. Period. So, of course, if the government Bolsonaro was elected, it was very likely they'll try to privatize Petrobras, for instance. Would not be an easy process, but you try to get it. Governor Lula, and I think that's a common sense, not of Lula, but many of apart, including Alckmin. State-owned company are related to economic development of the country. So they are not only a private business in the sense that they are just extracting oil and selling oil, but they are committed also to have a more broad agenda. That I think was something that happened in the past. I think that Lula in some way might want Petrobras to be supportive to this agenda. That doesn't mean that Petrobras will be doing everything you're doing in the past. For instance, gas transport TAG was privatized. I don't think that to be reversed. Refinery was privatized. I don't think that to be reversed. But still, I think some policies in energy will be require some support. Even this was talking about the blue energy, the gas, the utilization of gas. That Petrobras should be a main actor in providing this kind of energy kind of product. So I think Petrobras is a very important state-owned company. I don't think that we're dealing about a state a full state directed guided investment, but because Lula in the past was very supported for private investment, Petrobras, most BNDES were companies very focused and created support, financial support for many private investment in Brazil and outside. I think the local development, technology development will be important. I think that we call national content investments. That will be some requirement, and that should be perfected because it was very difficult to identify which content of the investment is national, which is international, but that will be a mix. I think some things will be present in the past. But I think the advantage here that we already had experienced the errors and the mistakes in the past. So now you have people who already are more experienced in this matter. So we might have more qualified policies here. And you see that by the point who cost Musto Teixeira, who's have been appointed already, just say the head of Itamaraty. They are very experienced people and very understanding. I think we have a very good expectation about what the results will be. I don't know. As I answered your question, that was my question.
I'm going to ask the last question, but it's not now, and nobody's going to answer because I'm going to ask who is going to be the president of Petrobras and the minister of energy.
No idea.
Nobody, yeah, no idea.
You asking the wrong Luis Inácio.
Yes.
But Ieda, just to add very briefly to what Luis mentioned, I think that we have to have in mind that over the past decade, regardless of the merit, Petrobras and its investment plan was pretty much affected by the impacts of the car wash investigation. So a decade ago, when CEO Graça Foster was ahead of the company, she already talked about Petrobras transition to an energy company. There were plans to kind of departure from mostly oil and gas. And of course, that had to be put aside for a while. And I think now the company is at another moment, all these, in addition to the compliance and governance procedures, but also the financial performance allows it to merge very well with the new administration's view of green agenda, of the fight against climate change. So I think that there is room, and perhaps there will be the financial conditions for the company to take a step that is sustainable in that direction.
Let me only agree and add, I completely agree. In fact, let's say all the big companies in the world became energy companies. You have Equinor changed even the name, Total Energy changed the name, Shell was one of the pioneers, even Qatar Energy, now Lula is no more an oil company, it's an energy company. So if you let's say most of the oil companies in the world has changed because in the future, well, the oil will lose a role in the society. But anyway, in the short and medium term, we are not saying that Petrobras will not, that the oil sector will not be the main sector of the Petrobras. No, the upstream, the production and exploitation of oil will be for many years the main the core of the company, the main sector of the company. What I think the new government are saying that, let's say, okay, not going to put all the eggs in the same basket. Yes, the main sector is oil, but let's look for other possibilities as offshore wind, as hydrogen, as refineries, modern refineries that There you have biorefineries. So things like that, let's say, put Petrobras in a new direction, more connected to other oil companies in the world. So I think that, let's say, in what concerns the climate change, the worry with the climate and other things, Petrobras has some work to do to be more connected to the expectation even from the market. Let's say the big investors, some big investors that not invest in companies that does not worry with, let's say, with the climate issue. So as Mario has explained, for many reasons, Petrobras is on retard on what concerns this perspective. But I think now this will change, and it was announced during the campaign, and I think that is for sure it will become an energy company.
Yeah, one of the advantages of Petrobras compared to the other international oil companies that you mentioned is that the shareholders base of Petrobras is much more tolerant in terms of having a company that's very efficient and produce low carbon compared to other oils. So that's a very relevant factor as well. I have more question here about gas, and somebody asked a question about blue hydrogen. We talk a lot about green hydrogen that's produced from electrolysis, but because we have all this gas being re-injected in the pre-salt, whether you see, and I think that question more for Mauricio, Brazil developed some blue hydrogen using natural gas, that's pre-salt gas.
I think that's a good possibility. I think that as we have natural gas, if you can inject the CO2, we can do produce blue hydrogen. And the question now is the competitiveness of that. What is more competitive? Using, let's say, wind generation, solar generation to produce green hydrogen, or use natural gas with capture, greenhouse gas capture to produce blue hydrogen. So it's a question, I think, of competitiveness. But I think that's an alternative, yes.
Okay, there some possibilities, quite extensive. Yeah. So I'd like to, because we approach in the end, before the end, I would like to listen individually to each one of you for your final considerations, and in particular, how do you see the energy sector evolving in Brazil over the next 4 years? So I would start with Mario, then Luis, and then Mauricio.
Sure. I think that from this investment perspective and how foreign players might be looking at the energy landscape in Brazil, renewables will certainly be a field full of opportunities because not only it kind of couples the country's production and generation capacity, but also this broader backdrop of the fight against climate change, the green agenda, and as Mauricio mentioned as well, how we have now many, for example, even investment funds or sovereign funds that are ditching kind of industries or sectors that are kind of the carbon footprint is significant to focus on renewables. So there will be demand for these projects. And I think that both the federal and state level governments understand and perceive the opportunity that is there. And I think within a kind of a longer time frame, we also create the conditions, for example, for the construction of the creation of an industry around these. So even a supply chain in the States where these projects will be installed. So in short, I think that that's the main opportunity. And we see the expectation from investors that Brazil will remain open for business during the new administration. There's not a perception, as we saw, for example, in Colombia, where and also a left-wing administration took office, but with a much more radical view about extractive industries, for example, in which we saw really investors taking a step back and deciding to postpone investments, while in Brazil we see a continued interest throughout the transition that is likely to materialize in concrete investments over the coming months and years.
Yeah, I totally agree with Mario. I think from if you experience the past and how government he focused in developing environment for favor for business. We have of course different kind of problems. You have Brazil is where Amazon is located, and Amazon is a huge place for investment opportunity. How to develop the Amazon region without destroying the
forest.
The region, the forest is very important. It's very important, very difficult. You have to a lot of challenge to relation of indigenous people and the conflict that it comes from that. So you have different regional disputes in states. The north region is very poor. The south and the center is very rich. So you have different quality of life and business and structures that is very, very challenging. But I think you have first the experience on the past that allows to face these problems, but with a more mature perspective. I think that the investors also growing this spirit to ask is a major thing today with companies, and environment is becoming more and more a major thing for investments in the world, and Brazil is a leader in this area, I think. And what you have to create and establish, I think Mario said that you have to have a very clear regulatory policy in place that don't create surprises each step you go. That was main. I think most investors had the past concern about that. You come with what to understand a clear perspective, how to invest in the goals, and sometimes you have surprises that create problems in the future. So I think that's something you have to look at it very carefully, and that's something I think is included what Lula called the administrative reform. That is the main agenda.
Okay, thank you. Mauricio?
Well, I fully agree with Mario and Luis. I think that the question of energy transition, renewables, will be in the center, the environment will be the center for the new government. I give you two reasons for that. The first one is that the green movements are an important part of the Lula alliance, the alliance that elected Lula. And they have an important role in the government. The second is that Lula, everybody knows, has an ambition that bring Brazil again to the world, to become Brazil, let's say, an important player in the world. And it's clear that to that, the environment can be the instrument to make this feasible. So I think that it's clear for him that my point of view, that is a strategic thing for Brazil to, let's say, not only protect the environment, but let's say use the environment to create jobs and let's say to as a kind of soft power, let's say a different way to integrate Brazil in the world. So I'm very confident that the energy sector will be, let's say, the Amazon is one of the center of this strategy, and the other center will be the energy sector. I think those two are very important sectors for this view of, let's say, of integration, a different integration of Brazil in the world, the role of Brazil in the world. So I think that is why I'm very convinced that the renewables will gain importance, even more importance in the new government.
Totally agree. And I will pass now the word to Daniella because our time passed very fast. Thank you very much. And Daniella, for you to thank our speakers and finalize the webinar.
Thank you very much, Ida. Like they say, time goes fast when you're having fun. And I certainly enjoyed very much today's discussion. So I would like to again thank Mauricio, Luis, and Mario for their for sharing their experience and expertise, and also thank you, Ida, for sort of conducting as a maestro that or maestrina that's a wonderful discussion. I think that it's really interesting to hear about the challenges that Brazil has with practical things like the transmission system, making sure that we have a resilient energy matrix, but also discussing issues as to how can we really attract investment from a fiscal perspective, cleverly. How can we do that such that we can afford it, but that its impact is maximized? And of course, the role of a company like Petrobras, which, as we know, all the erstwhile oil companies are all becoming energy companies because that's the way to the future. I think that Petrobras, in a way, is privileged, like Yed, I think, highlighted the investor base in Petrobras is perhaps a bit more accepting of a fossil fuel cash flow base for a foreseeable future, which perhaps some of the other energy majors don't have that benefit. And I think what that can do is it can give Petrobras a very strong purse with which to invest in the future of the energy system, and understanding what role Brazil can play in that global stage. So thank you very much again for your participation to all of you. Thank you for our audience and their questions, which were very interesting as well. And I look forward to seeing you all in 2023. A Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Merry Christmas, everyone.
Yes.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. Bye.